I'd like to begin by thanking Scott and thanking Dennis Charney and RPI and all the people who helped organize this. Maybe you can join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you. As Scott said, I have the very difficult task of summarizing 2 days of intense conversation, so I won't even try. Instead, I'm going to point to a few things that are particularly relevant to, I think, Mount Sinai, what we're doing at this time, and a few others that I found particularly poignant. To say that what we've heard is disruptive is a huge understatement. To say it's closer to, as someone said on the first day, an industrial revolution is closer to reality. And in that kind of revolution, it's going to be decades before we fully realize the opportunities that are before us. And of course, along the way, there'll be people who will smash their computers and their desktops and will give us the kind of film that Jeremy showed us. But I don't think that that kind of nihilism is going to be particularly helpful. I think what we really have to do is challenge that angst and figure out how we can make the system better. Because those very people who are behind that film probably 30 years ago were the same people who were really angry about all the charting that they had to do and all the information that they couldn't get and the time that they wrote QID but meant QD. So we have to believe, I think all of us who've been really a part of this revolution and seen what medicine was like a decade ago compared to what it is now, have to understand that quality is far better than it was. But that said, let's talk about some of the things that aren't going to take decades, some of the things that are happening now at Mount Sinai and in a few other places around the world that are really providing, I think, extraordinary results. We talked about the biology of wellness, that healthcare scientists, for the most part, until recently, would study the biology of disease. But genomics, microbiomics, proteomics has given us the opportunity to look at these large databases and ask, well, what is it about people who are well? And Eric Schatz's group is asking a really fascinating question around wellness, which is what's special about a person who may have a gene for, say, cystic fibrosis or Alzheimer's disease, high risk for Alzheimer's disease, but in Alzheimer's disease case, lives into their 90s functioning perfectly. What is the genomic basis of that, and does it give us a new drug target? And we at Mount Sinai are aggressively pursuing that angle, and I think it's going to be an entirely new way to develop therapeutics that may be, far more revealing and efficacious in some very tough diseases than we've ever had before. What's close to happening? Well, I think close to happening is what somebody else called precise and practical data. And what is meant by that is that simple question of what's the best hypertensive medication for this patient who has a whole bunch of comorbidities and is taking a whole bunch of other drugs? What's best? I think he commented, the person who was talking about that, the comment was, it takes about 5 months before the appropriate hypertensive medication is found and the patient stabilized, and we could probably do that in 2 months. Well, imagine a whole system like that when you will be able to query a database about that patient that's going to answer that particular question in a way that's going to really be robust and shorten the time till they can have the most efficacious treatments. I think that's close. We also know that precise medicine is very close at Mount Sinai with the prostate work that Carlos Cordencordo are doing. The ability to differentiate those genes that tell us that this tumor is going to be very invasive versus a tumor that's going to be relatively non-invasive is an important advance that is made possible by precision data and the kind of digital work that we're doing here. But the challenges for full potential are real. I mean, they're enormous, they're difficult. We talked already, just the last few minutes, about interoperability and what a problem that is. We talked earlier about the necessity for some universal data platform. That seems far in the distance, but obviously would have enormous advantages. And we've talked and seen the video that suggests how angry doctors are about how difficult the EMR can be and how they're not really talking to their patients, but they're talking to the computer. And clearly we have to do something better around that. But we have to understand that in doing that, the goal here is to communicate with patients. And to make that happen, when we use MyChart, we bring an opportunity for patients to get really engaged in their health care. And when we are encouraging patients to own their data, that's going to be a good thing. But yesterday we also talked about productivity and why our industry is one of the least productive of all industries. And one of the comments that were made was, well, part of that is the necessity that we have to talk to patients. You know, like, that's a surprise. We have to talk to patients. And the fact is, if we're good doctors, we should spend a lot of time talking to patients. And I would suggest that as we empower patients with more and more data, we'll have to spend even more time talking to patients, and we might very well become even less productive. But we'll be more sensitive and have better outcomes. But think about, as I do sometimes as a psychiatrist, what happens when patients have their own data. They don't always do the right thing just because they have their own data. They take lots of herbal supplements. They are sometimes in huge states of denial about their illness. They sometimes think that it couldn't possibly right and the doctor's got to be wrong. They are hypochondriacal sometimes. So it's going to be a very mixed bag of what comes out when we empower patients. I'm happy that we will, but I think it's not going to add to our productivity, and I don't think we should have the expectation that it will. In the long run, it's the macroeconomics of healthcare that are forcing us to move away from fee-for-service medicine. It's not just that fee-for-service medicine has some bad incentives for us to do a lot more than we need to do, because one could equally argue that there are incentives in the value-based system that will also be perverse. We may find doctors who will do even less because they'll collect more money at the end for having not done things that they should have done. And we saw that in the 90s with HMOs. Patients revolted against the notion that their care was being managed this way. That isn't to say that I am not utterly in favor of value-based care and that we haven't put Mount Sinai totally in that direction and that I think it's an advantage over fee-for-service medicine. But let's understand it's the macroeconomics of healthcare that's driving that. The fact that GDP in the United States is 18% of GDP is in healthcare, and the rest of the world, rest of the modern economies are about half that. So what does digital medicine offer for us in a value-based world? We touched on this yesterday. It offers the possibility of prevention, of identifying disease before it becomes manifest. That's what we'd like to do. So how's that going to really play out? By the end of 2016 at Mount Sinai, we'll have 400,000 patients under risk. 2 years, 3 years later, we'll probably have 1 million patients under risk. They're patients that we're managing, a lot of them, with multiple chronic diseases. So let's say that we tease out of that the group that are type 2 diabetics. And what we ask with the Google contact lens is that we will in real time monitor their glucose. And of those 1 million people, let's say we just pick just a small number, 20,000 that we're going to keep monitoring. 20,000 patients with Google contact lenses who in real time are giving us their glucose levels. And alongside of them, let's talk about all the patients who have some cardiac disease that's relatively serious. And we think it's a good idea to watch their EKGs because of the possibility they may have some life-threatening arrhythmias. And we would like to do something before those arrhythmias actually have a horrible consequence. So maybe there are another 20,000 of those. And I can go on about how many we'd like to manage in real time with COPD. So we begin to see that in real time, we might have to monitor to prevent disease 100,000 patients of the million. That may be conservative. In real time. Do you know what happens every time Dennis and I and the management team present that to the companies that we would like to talk to and partner with? Everybody says, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. How are we going to be able to provide the data that is actionable to the physician in real time so that they can contact that patient, bring them in, and save their lives? That's where we got to go, and that's not where we are. But that's the opportunity. Whether it's going to take low-energy chips, whether it's going to take more analytics, I don't know. That's not my area. But I tell you, that's the promise, and that's the challenge. And for us, that's where the big payoff is. But let's not kid ourselves that it's around the block or it's 2 years away. It's really going to be hard, and we're not there yet. I want to end on this note. I have a more happy note. We are going to be building a new Beth Israel hospital. And we had a whole session on what the hospital of the future should look like. And by and large, our management team hasn't talked to those people, but we're headed in a parallel direction. We know that the future for hospitals is more of the virtual hospital, which I thought was a wonderful idea. That hospitals are going to be smaller, they're going to do different things, they're going to be all wired up. Patients are going to have portals at their bedside, they'll be communicating with their doctors, perhaps by telemedicine in real time, and with their nurses. It will be a completely different hospital. It'll be a friendlier hospital. And we have the opportunity now to build that hospital at the Beth Israel site and be able to do things that I think we couldn't have even conceptualized just a few years ago. And it's an enormously exciting opportunity for us. So, the road's going to be long, the challenges are great, the frustrations are real, but the opportunities are enormous. Good luck as we move forward, and thanks for giving me this time.